Some of these hotkeys are going to be the same thing that you would see inside of Photoshop or Illustrator. Things like the selection tool. So I'm just going to make a document, make a solid. Okay. So the selection tool, which is right there, the hotkey is V for that. Okay. That's the same hotkey that you would see in Photoshop or Illustrator for their selection tool. Typically, people forget to go to the selection tool. They go out of this tool, and then they forget to get back into it to select stuff. One of the annoying things about After Effects is that you have to be in a selection tool to actually select stuff, which is really stupid. The next one is the hand tool, which I'm sure you've seen before too, which is just H, so you can move your document around. We're physically not moving the solid around. We're just moving what we're seeing around, okay? So if I'm in V, I'm actually moving this because you can see there's black here and there's my layer solid there. If I hit H and move it, then I'm doing this. Now if you hold the space bar, that toggles you back into the hand tool. So if you're just holding the space bar, you can do that and then let go and then you're good. If you tap the space bar, that will be play, which again we should already know that one. Alright. The zoom right here is Z, so you can zoom in and out. So you can see how I can click and zoom in areas. If I hold down Alt, I can zoom out of things. Typically I don't go to the zoom tool. I'll typically just use the mouse scroll wheel and zoom in and out. And you'll see that it's pretty simple. Just move in and out, hold the space bar to get the hand, and then recenter it. Or you can use this guy down here. Okay. There's also a rotate tool. So I can go in here and grab a layer and rotate it. This is typically simpler than trying to be in this tool, and you can't rotate it from this, but in some cases you will be able to rotate it from this tool. It'll bring up a transform selector, and then you could rotate it. So if you have trouble, you can just go to that rotate tool up here or hit W, which is pretty perfect because that's just every software, the rotate tool is a different hotkey. In Maya, it's E. In Cinema, it's R. And then in After Effects, it's W. I don't know whether you come up with them. But like I said before, I typically will just go down here and just scroll with my rotate. That's typically easier for me to do. The other ones that are up here, the camera tools, we're not going to get into those yet. But just so you can see what they're going to do. So far, we've been working all in 2D, right? So we've been basically moving left and right and up and down with our items or scaling them in two directions. So if I click on this little box here, okay, and avoid doing this until we actually get to it so you understand it better. But that little box turns on what's called 3D in After Effects. It's not actually 3D. It's like they call it 2.5D because it's like fake 3D. But what happens is you'll see I get a new manipulator. And as I hover my mouse over these things, you'll see that it turns to a Y, to an X, very handy there. But then there's also this blue one right here that turns into Z. And now what it does is if I click on Z, oops, make sure I'm in the move tool, not that. If I click on Z and drag back, okay, I'm in the move tool, but it looks like it's scaling down, right? It's not. What's happening is it's pushing it further away. Now where these camera tools come in is I'm going to make a camera, and I'll just leave this as a one node. There we go. And if I hit the C key to get to the camera, what I'm doing is I'm actually able to spin around this environment. Okay. Now just to make it a little bit more apparent, I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'll scoot this one over. I'll pull it up more. I'll hit C. And now you can see how this is more along the lines of actually using a camera and kind of moving around inside the scene. Now inside this there are several tools. All the hotkeys are C. The unified camera tool will basically allow you to do all three of these. But sometimes you basically just want to do one or the other. Like sometimes I just want to track Z, which is basically just moving in and out. Okay, so now I'm just zooming in and out on that on those spots. Imagine a real camera. I move the camera closer, I pull the camera back. That's exactly what we're doing. Track X and Y, which means I'm just going to track up or down or left and right. And then we have orbit, which is what I was doing a minute ago, which is spinning around. Okay. Now when we get into later assignments, we'll actually be using the 3D layers and 3D cameras to make our items seem a little bit more nicer. It's the best word for that. Okay, so I can use C to just toggle through all of these different menu items, but basically I use everything from here as when I work. The pan behind anchor tool we've already used. That's the one that we're going to use to grab the anchor point and put it to the corners or move it wherever we need to. Just so you can see it again, let me delete these bits here. I'll make a new one. I'll hit Y and then we'll drag this to that. Okay. Now, be careful with this tool. Remember down here when we were dragging layers over and I said make sure you don't click on that far left side and start dragging stuff over? Because if you are in this and you drag it over, what does that do? This one doesn't, right? When I'm right here and I do that, that's not moving it, that's actually cutting it. Okay? When I'm in the middle here and I move this, that's moving it. Alright? So I'm just going to put some keyframes in here. I'm going to go boop here and then just scoot that over. Great. Okay. Alright, so now that's what this does. So if I grab this and move it, you can see my keyframes move with it. If I'm on the far left side and I do that, it's just cutting it. But if I'm in the pan behind tool and I drag this, look what it's doing. You see how the layer itself isn't physically moving. I'm getting some weird dashes right there. My keyframes are staying in the same spot. Okay? What it's actually doing is taking that clip and just keeping everything on the timeline where it is and just adjusting it. Okay? So that can be very confusing because you're like, I'm moving it and nothing's happening. This will come into play when we get into doing pre-compositions and we get into doing some movie type stuff inside here. We can actually, let's say we grab a clip of a movie and we just need to basically keep the area locked in, but just adjust what's playing. That's where we can use that pan behind to grab a different section of that video. Okay? So just be aware that this tool does multiple things. So make sure you're on the right tool if you want to move your layer or cut your layer or any of that. The rectangle tool, Q, that's the shape layer. That's what we went over last class, where we were able to make the circles or any of those other shapes to create some pieces to work on. The pen tool, we can make our custom shapes. So this one here, I could just draw a shape. I can double click it. Or I can go to the pen tool and I can draw my own shape, just like you would inside of Illustrator or Photoshop. Okay? Now, every time I draw a shape, I get a path. Nice thing about this is that the path that I just drew, remember we used that trim path last time? I can use that trim path to redraw this out. So let's say that I had my signature and I wanted it to write my signature. I could write my signature with the pen tool and then use the trim path to animate my signature being written on. Okay? Just to give you a horrible example of me writing my signature on here, and I really need to shrink that down. Holy cow, that's huge. There we go. Oops. Alright, so we'll just do letter S here. There we go. And then, oops. Yes. It is a fancy looking S. A fancy bumpy S. And G again. Now the only difference here is that I'm still in the pen tool when I'm selecting stuff. So like if you're in Illustrator, you would typically switch to the direct select to grab points. You don't do that in here. If I switch to hold control, it'll subtract points. Okay, so just be aware of it. Alright, so here's my fancy letter S. I'm going to go down here to my contents. This should be shape number 2. And I'm just going to go to add, whoops, trim path somewhere in the mix. There we go. And then you can see how I can animate that coming in. Now what's cool about this also is that we could actually draw paths inside of Illustrator, copy and paste them into shapes, and then use the trim path on it. Okay? So that is a possibility. Also works very similar way. Alright. So that's what the pen tool can be used for. Multiple tools are inside here. We can also use the pen tool for creating masks. Okay, so let's say that I had a solid like this, or a shape layer, like that. Perfect. And I'm just going to pre-compose this so that it's just flattened out. Okay, so now I have this item, but I want to cut part of this out. So I can go into my pen tool and just draw right on top of that. And what you're going to see is that it cut that area out of there. Okay, so this is very handy. Let's say I had a person and I needed to cut them out. I could just extract that person out of there just by simply drawing a pen tool line around it. Now, one of the latest additions to After Effects is this mask feather tool. So I think 2015 they added this, maybe 14. But what it allows you to do, I'll show you the horrible version first. This is what we used to have. F is a hotkey to get the mask feathering up. So this is all we used to be able to do, is just click and drag, and we would have this gradient, basically, this feathering that would happen around the entire object. For some cases that worked out perfectly. Most cases it didn't. If I'm outlining a character, I'm basically going to have like sharp edges around the character here. When I get into stuff like the hair, or I get into stuff like motion blur, it's fuzzy. So what they did is they introduced this feathering tool, which allows me to grab on a single point and pull it off. Now you'll see all of them are going, but what I can do is then go to this point and just lock it back in. So you'll see basically this is crisp, and then this is nice and soft. All right, so that was a long time in the coming for that one. All right, so there are other tools inside here. Make sure you look at them. These ones you can typically get to by holding down hotkeys. I don't need to go into the hotkeys right now, but they're there. Type tool, Control T. We'll be playing with that today. Okay, every time we type, we make a new layer. There's my new layer. It has its own properties. If I drop down here, I go to text. You'll see there's a source text, there's path options, there's more options. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can play with on pretty much any of those. There's also a character palette, just like you would see in InDesign or Photoshop or Illustrator, or any of the programs. What else? Some of the other things that we're not going to really get into right now: brush tool, clone stamp, eraser. These tools here we will be using later just for doing some adjustments inside there. Okay. Just know what those are. You'll see that the hotkey is Control B, Control B, Control B for all three of those. Alt W, Roto brush tool, same thing, we'll get into that. And then the puppet tool. This one's a neat one. I'll just show it just so you can see what this does. And you may already have seen this from like Photoshop class, because it's very similar to that one. So there's a puppet tool right here. And what we do is we click on these points. And imagine that this is a flexible piece of paper, and I just put some pins into these flexible pieces of paper. Now what I can do is, if I have two pins here, and I grab this pin and start moving it, these pins stay where they're at, and the other pin will move. See? So if I needed to create something like a diving board or create something very animated, I could do that. You could even create characters using stuff like the puppet pin tool, which is pretty awesome. Okay. Very cool. Alright, so that's the puppet tool. Zooming in and out, period and comma. Notice on your keyboard, they're right next to each other, right? Like I said, After Effects is kind of smart when it comes to its hotkeys. So if we go to the period or the comma, you can see what they're going to do. Whoops. There is no difference, right? So if I hit Z and I zoom in and out or hold Alt, it's just a different way to get to it, okay? Typically you'll find that, like most things, that there's 7 ways to do it. Finding the best way for you. I typically never use the Z tool, but I know, or the zoom tool magnifier, but I know there's a lot of people that do use it for specific things. The only time I really would use the zoom tool, because I switch programs so often that it's hard to remember all the hotkeys, and Z is typically like an easy one to remember for the zoom, that sometimes I'll forget the exact combination of Control spacebar, spacebar Control. See, I don't even remember now. Maybe it's not even in this program. No, it's not. There was another hotkey. No, that's not it. Okay. In Photoshop and Illustrator, I can hit Control spacebar, and then I can zoom in and out. That brings me to a zoom tool. So yes, I will use zoom if I need to marquee something, or I'll use these, or I'll use my scroll wheel. Typically, I use my scroll wheel in the hand. That's the fastest way for me. Rulers, just like you've seen in other programs, Control R brings up rulers. Boom. And drag down guides just like you would in any other program. Purge all memory. All right. So we've kind of hit on this a little bit already. Your computer starts to slow down a little bit. When we hit the play button inside of After Effects, we get this green bar that goes across, and that green bar is basically taking every single one of those frames and loading it into the computer's memory. Okay? Now, why this is important to us is that after a while, that memory can get filled up, and our computer starts to act really slow. We hit the play button, and After Effects goes frame 1, frame 2, frame 3. And so we need to basically wipe everything out, all right? So Control-Alt/, not the backslash. Oops, I have to stop first. Come on. Why aren't you working? I may have the hotkey on something else. Oh, it's the number pad one, right? All right, Control-Alt/, and that wipes off all my stuff. You can also go to Edit Purge, and then typically I will just do all memory and disk cache, and then just say OK. The other thing After Effects does is as you're working on stuff, it writes stuff to your hard drive. So you may find on your own computer, at the beginning of the semester you had 50 gigs, and then by halfway through you have 20 gigs, just because After Effects is eating up a lot of your hard drive. Inside, just so you can see where this is, inside my Documents folder, there's an Adobe folder. After Effects has its own folder right here, and this is where it starts loading in all of these like temporary files. Premiere also has one, and Premieres can get also very big. So does Media Encoder, so does Audition. Alright, so typically I will wipe that if I'm running low on hard drive space. Doesn't affect anything. You're not going to lose any files by wiping purging all of your cache and memory. It's just going to help you save space. It may make After Effects run a little bit slower for a minute while it reloads everything. All right, what else? This is what we talked about before. Hitting caps lock should pause your rendering. On my computer the other day, remember it wasn't doing that. There it goes. So it says right there, refresh disabled, release caps lock to refresh view. I can release caps lock. I don't know why it's so glitchy on this one. We've talked about these. These are all the things doing with specifically the anchor or the layers themselves. So anchor point, position, scale, rotation, opacity. So coming down to here, anchor point is A, opacity is T, P is position, S is scale, and R is rotation. All right. Most of them are the first letter, so R is rotation, P is position, S is scale. Opacity is T. I don't know why. And then anchor point is A, so that makes sense. So opacity is the only one that is not the same letter. So when you see something like that in the test, these ones should be the first letter, except for opacity. Or if you just think of that T part, it makes it easier. Then we also have effects properties. So if I add an effect to my stuff, blur, okay, and I want to see that effect, I can hit E, and then you'll see here's the effect of puppet that I had on there, and then here's the effect of bilateral blur. Okay, so that automatically drops down these areas, so then I can set keyframes on them. U shows keyframes or expressions, so if I hit U, it'll show me all the stuff that I've done. If I hit W, U and U, it'll show me which ones have been modified, which is nice because sometimes you move something and you're not sure you even did it. It'll let you know you've done that. Creating a new solid, we know that one, Control Y. Moving in point and out point. So I want this layer to start here, so I hit the left bracket and it moves that layer. I want it to end here. I hit that button, the right bracket, and it ends there. Okay. Now this is simply just moving the start point or moving the end point to a specific spot. Where this would come in handy, let's say this layer is only this long, and I have, and I have so many of these right here, and I want to basically just stack these one right after the other. I can move my little ticker to the end, go to the next one on the list, and hit left bracket. Then go to the end of that one, click the next one, hit left bracket. Go to the end of that one. There we go. Click this one, hit left bracket. So you see how very easily I can just move these layers around and get them lined up to where I need them to be. Okay. Or if I have keyframes, I want them to be lined up with a specific spot. It's simply a matter of just moving the ticker and hitting that left or right bracket. Trimming them, it would be Alt left bracket or Alt right bracket. Again, moving them is just a bracket. Holding Alt trims it. So pay attention to that too. If I want this layer to end over here, Alt right bracket. If I want this one to start here, Alt left bracket. Okay. Now if I go way back here and I hit Alt left bracket, you'll see nothing's going to happen to it. Okay. There is no more layer back there, so it can't automatically expand that layer to fit there because it doesn't exist. The layer just simply isn't that long. If I have a 3-second movie, I can't make my 3-second movie 35 seconds just because I told it to be here and here. Okay? I'd have to do something extra to that layer. I can move that layer back, but I can't expand it back. Setting time markers. This is a cool one that will save a lot of time. So sometimes you'll have certain things happening, like you have a song and you're trying to match up the beat to that song, right? So what you can do is if you hit the asterisk on your numeric keypad, you'll see that it puts this little marker inside here, okay? And that marker is great because what it does is it tells you something happened there, all right? And I know exactly what happened. Now what's cool about this is that I could actually go here, hit the play button, and then just tap as it's going. So as I'm listening to a song inside of After Effects, I can just be tapping that asterisk, the multiply key, to the beat. And then when I go back, I know here's where all my beats are, here's where I have to line up my stuff. So that makes it incredibly simple. Yes, ma'am?
Is there a way for it to show sound waves?
Yes. If we had sound, which we'll show today, you hit LL and it'll show you the wave. Okay? You could also go through and give these comments. So let's say that you're working at a company and you give your boss or you give another employee the stuff and they want to make comments on something. They can put a marker in there and say, fix this section. Oops. They can give it a label, so they can give it a different color. They can link you to different things. They can do these things here. I'm not sure if these are still used, but at one point you could actually use these markers that would then translate into Encore. Have you ever heard of Encore? Yeah, maybe. It used to be a DVD program. DVDs were these discs that you'd be able to play. They're like Blu-ray but worse. You'd be able to make DVDs from After Effects. So you'd make your After Effects stuff. That would go into Premiere. You'd set up markers, and then those markers are automatically your chapters, which made it like incredibly easy to do. But they've since quit Encore or whatever. All right. But incredibly helpful set time marker. Removing the time markers, control clicking. Control click that time marker, it goes away, it goes away, it goes away. Or you can simply just right click on them and say delete all markers, delete this markers, or go to marker time. Or lock the markers if you want to do that. Okay. Replacing selected layers. I did this with a couple of you. So if we have a layer down here that we need to replace, okay, I'm not too happy with this layer, I can just go up to this, hold down the Alt key, and drag a new item on top of it. And what it does is just replace that layer. So imagine that we have this really complex animation happening, and there's one layer in the middle that I just don't like how that looks. I can go grab a replacement for it and just Alt drag it, and then all the properties and all the positioning of it will be locked into that same exact spot. It literally is just swapping one out for the other. Okay? You'll see it throughout the class that becomes incredibly helpful. Timeline. All right, so all of these were for the layer, adjusting layer properties and moving positions of layers. This is for adjusting where the timeline is and how we can get to different spots. So if I hit B, it sets the beginning of my work area. If I go up a little bit and hit N, it sets the end of my work area. Again, not really anything you can really memorize or use as a mnemonic device. But they are right next to each other on the keyboard, B and N. Okay, beginning, I guess, and end, I guess. But that's of your work area. Going to previous keyframes and next keyframes. Again, right next to each other. I don't think I have any keyframes on here, so let me just set some here and there. Perfect. Okay, so I can hit J and K to jump between these. As you set keyframes, make sure you're on the keyframes. It's very easy to be right here. Think you're adjusting the position of it, But what happens is we get this weird jump now. You see how there's like a weird like tick jump. Okay? So that's why we want to be exactly on the keyframe so that we can adjust it. Now if I hit K, more than number of keyframes that I have, you'll see that it just goes to the very end of my composition. If I hit J, it just goes back to the very beginning. Okay? Going to layer in point, going to layer out point. Same thing, IO. Okay? If I want to go to the start of the layer or the end of the layer. So remember that little trick I did where I was hitting the left bracket to move that layer down to the next spot? Well, I can click on the next layer, hit O, it'll jump me to the end. Click on the next layer, hit left bracket. Okay? So if I could just cut this like so, and I duplicated it, I can go to this one, say O, this one, left bracket, and then O, this one, oops, dang it. Let's try that again. Left bracket, yes. Then go to the output. Then go here, go to the left bracket, then go to the output. Then go to the left bracket, and then output. Okay? So it can just save you a little bit of time knowing some of these hotkeys to very quickly lay out your stuff. Beginning of comp, end of comp. Okay, so ignoring the timeline or the layers themselves, this would just go to the very beginning of your composition or the very end. Should be self-explanatory. Control right arrow goes forward a frame. Control left arrow goes back a frame. Because of the spacing, I typically will just use page up and page down. But again, that's all based on you. Zooming in on time, zooming out on time. We really haven't had to do this too much, but if you use the plus sign here to zoom in and the minus sign to zoom out, that's on the top of the keyboard, you're zooming into this area. So if I have keyframes here, and sometimes we'll have like 5 keyframes close together, we need to get in there and start tweaking them or whatever, that's where we would want to use, oops, wrong button, that to zoom in and out. Okay? You can also use this thing down here. This little sliding thing, that's your zoom in and out. It'll zoom wherever your ticker is. So if my ticker is way over here, and I hit the plus sign, you see how it's zooming by the ticker, right? So just be aware of that too. Sometimes people want to zoom in here, and they think that it will, and they won't, doesn't. You can also use the hand tool down here to adjust your time. So it's not just for up here moving around. You can hold the space bar and just drag this too. Spacebar, start and stop, regular preview, and then there's something called a RAM preview where we can basically set up other options. Okay, so maybe we want to render or view every other frame, or we want to have a different setting for it. We can use 0 on the keypad. The preview settings are right here, so we can do things like I want to skip every 5 frames. Again, why we want to skip it? Speed. As we get into some of these higher projects, it's going to go super slow. When we hit the space bar, it's going to basically take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to load this entire thing up. Then we change something, another 5 or 10 minutes to change it. Okay, so by skipping every 5 frames, we can see what the animation is looking like overall before we get into the actual end result of it. Oops, sorry, I want to show the other thing here. And then you'll see it says shortcut is spacebar, but there's also, you can set other things here for the shortcut if you want to. You can cache it before playback, meaning that it will cache all the stuff first, it'll load it all up, and then it'll play it back. That can be very helpful. You can turn audio off, you can turn video off, so you're just seeing the audio. You can tell it to loop. What else? You can tell it to do the work area, or the work area extended by the current time, or entire duration, or play around current time. A whole bunch of different options, so look at those. I'm not going to go through all of those. A lot of those are going to be as you get into a certain spot, you're like, I want to do this. Can I do it? Yes, I can. No, I can't. Whatever. And then preview audio only is just the period. Okay? So just so you can see it, I'm going to bring in an audio clip. I have 3 audio clips I'll bring in. And that's as easy as they need to be. And when you bring audio into After Effects, they're WAV files. Okay? WAV. MP3s can go into After Effects, but sometimes what happens is when they get processed again, they start clicking. So it'll be like a jittery sound throughout. It won't sound like it in After Effects, but when you render it, it'll sound jittery. If you bring in a WAV file, a WAV is uncompressed, so you don't have that effect. So I just drag it down, and here's my audio clip. And then how do we see the audio file? We hit LL. And now we can see exactly what that audio looks like. We hit the period on the numeric keypad. I had to turn it up. There we go. Okay. Wonderful. All right. So that's how we can see the audio and how we can hear just the audio. So that's where sometimes we'll hit that period button, let the audio play, and then while it's playing, I'll be tapping the asterisk to get those markers in there. All right. So those are the hotkeys that are going to be on the test. They're not too difficult. It's just a matter of, again, reading through these. If you haven't read through these already, you have a week, almost a week, to read through them. Okay, Monday's our test. When you come in Monday, first thing we're going to get this out of the way. Okay, it'll be, just so you are comfortable with the format, I'll have a list of all of these. Okay, so it'll be in Canvas. So it'll say selection tool, and then you'll pick from the list here, H, Z, W, C, or Y. Okay, or it'll be V, and then you'll pick which the hotkey is, one of these 5 or 6. Okay, and then the next one will be the same thing. These 6 will be grouped together, and then these ones will be grouped together, and then these ones will be grouped together, and then these will be grouped together. Yes, ma'am.
Is this like online or is it?
It'll be online. It'll be through Canvas.
Can we do it on, take it on our own computer?
Yeah, as long as you're here. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on the hotkeys? The test Monday?